Hope's Hollow, a Sword and Sorcery Adventure. Part 2, Flame and Fortune. Chapter 6, The Dark Deal. Castus's deal to any neutral outside observer was a terrible choice for the formerly cowled, now very much cowed, necromancer. The cackler demanded information without limit, and Lissa gave it, because if there was one life the necromancer could not restore, it was her own. The woman, now clad in the somewhat bloodied but uncooked cloak belonging to her father, sat in the mausoleum's central chamber and divulged her cult's details in a near monotone. Drasha, whose experience with interrogations began and ended with Castus's long-winded tales during the ride north, Siln and Agram divulged nothing upon their deposit in the prisoner's carriage, began curious, then found himself getting more and more ill as the cackler pressed Lissa again and again. Castus wasn't laughing now. Instead, the cackler loomed over the captive necromancer, alternating between tooth-bearing scowls and gleaming grins. Agram, implacable and eternal, stood at Lissa's back, one arm and its attendant fist raised high for a fatal smash should the necromancer make the slightest move. Siln gave no emotion whatsoever, leaning against a stone wall and holding out her flame-springing hand to spread light. "Hasn't she given enough?" Drasha asked, after Castus again questioned Lissa's guess at the number of necromancers left at their barrow, and the skeletons they had in tow. "This is the 5th time you've asked her." "And I'll ask her again in a moment," Castus declared, waggling a dagger towards Drasha. "The first thing you must assume, my naive friend, is that any prisoner is prone to lying. They will say whatever they can to secure their lives, even better if the misdirect results in the terrible deaths of their captors. By having her repeat the numbers, retell her story, I am fishing for lies." Castus turned back to Lissa, whose blank face would have mirrored Siln's lack of concern save for its pallor. Lies which, thus far, she has admirably avoided. "Great, then maybe we can stop. It's late, I think, or at least I'm tired, and I'd rather not sleep down here." Drasha cast his gaze around. "Place is creepy, you know." "That's because you don't understand the dead," Lissa said, drawing a laugh from Castus. "See? Here you are, so worried for our frail friend," the cackler said to Drasha, "and she's just fine. I mean, she won't be in a moment when I riddle her with this knife, but now, hale and healthy." "What?" Lissa started, for the first time showing real emotion. "But Oh, please don't make a scene. What did you think would happen? We leave you alive to raise up these corpses to bludgeon our backs, or perhaps send some nefarious spell after our souls?" Agram grumbled agreement. Siln made no move. She may have been sleeping. "I won't. I swear," Lissa started, only for Castus to sigh, aim the knife. "Wait, please." "Is this tiring to the rest of you?" Castus asked, long ears twitching. "The begging. It's so dull." "I think we should hear her out," Drasha said. "You're just saying that because she seems helpless. Let her free, and you'll see how wrong that impression is." "No," Lissa interrupted. "I mean, yes, I am helpless. Very much. Murdering me would be terrible. And, I have a death curse." "A what?" Drasha asked. "Lying," Siln snapped, her icy focus now very much alive and angled at Lissa. "If your father didn't have the power to make a death curse, there's no way you do." "Okay," Lissa blushed, but pointed at Castus, the knife. "But some in our cult do, and I know how to dispel them. You want to take our treasure, you'll need me." "You writhe like a worm," Siln said. "But even a worm has its uses. Sit still." Lissa didn't move. Siln walked towards her, leaned down, not far, as Siln lacked height as much as Drasha lacked experience, and tapped Lissa's chest with the hand that didn't hold the flame. A small orange rose bloomed against Lissa's ratty tunic, before curling its petals into itself, then into Lissa. "A little gift," Siln said, rising. "Should I care to, or should I die before releasing the spell, you will feel what it's like to have a firelight within your body. Slow, hot, and very, very painful." Lissa caught her meaning, as did everyone else in the room. Except, perhaps, Agram, because who really knew what the rock creature was thinking? "Now you force her cooperation?" Castus threw up his hands. "Where was that an hour ago?" Siln shrugged. "You looked like you were having fun." The mausoleum's muddy entry became Drasha's choice for campground, their time spent underground bashing bones and whacking evil wizards, draining the day away to late afternoon. The prospect of a twilight stroll through monster-infested slime seemed suspect to everyone, even Agram. The rock monster settled itself against the mausoleum's door after they'd all walked out, tucking its stone head into its chest and going still. A soft grumble started soon after, drawing quizzical looks from everyone save Castus, who once again deployed his chuckle. The sounds mingled with chirping bats, the air crowded with the winged things and their buzzing food. "The rock purrs in agreement," Castus said to Drasha. "We stop here for the night." "Good enough," Siln announced. "Don't disturb me unless it's an emergency." "Didn't you nap all afternoon?" Drasha asked as Siln set herself near a notch in the mausoleum's sinking outer wall. "How are you tired already?" Siln frowned. "Exhaustion has nothing to do with it. I'm just sick of you all." Castus laughed. Siln wrapped herself up in another ice cocoon. Drasha set about unloading 2 packs, pilfered from the carriage they'd left inside the mausoleum's entry. 2 bedrolls, a smattering of dried fruits and vegetables, some salted meats, and random gear. As Drasha unpacked, he felt Lissa watching him. The necromancer hadn't said a word since their exodus, since Siln and Castus both denied the woman a chance to draw her dead father back to the living. "Set up camp, Drasha," Castus said, not once looking back. "Much as the swamp disgusts me, I feel an urge to be on my feet, to discover whether our little witch has spoken the truth and whether pursuing her claims will be profitable. Have dinner ready, for I shall return in several hours and demand it." The cackler gave one more laugh, this one a light-hearted, tittering thing, and dashed off into the reeds, disappearing amid the vines, lilting willows and hazy gnats. Drasha watched Castus vanish, looked down at his single unfurled roll, then turned to the necromancer. "Care to help?" "No." "Great." Lysa slumped to the side, her look going glassy, and said nothing while Drasha pulled out the second bedroll, stomped around searching for sticks, and managed to spark a small fire. Like the water Drasha strained and boiled in an iron pot, his ire towards the necromancer's lack of assistance filtered through to clean understanding, a realization that Lissa wasn't just being useless. The girl was in shock. "Sorry there's nothing to flavor it with, but you know, it's water," Drasha said, taking one of their 2 wood cups, filling it with water bearing only a few mossy bits, and handing it to her. "Won't kill you now." Lissa stared at the cup. "What did you do to it?" "Boiled. Means it won't make you sick. Like I said." "What?" Drasha sat opposite Lissa, the fire burning merrily to his left, the sun setting into a bland twilight, and told Lissa, in too much detail, how everyone learned to boil water in the slums. What happened when you didn't was simply too disgusting to mention. "Is that not a problem for you?" Drasha asked. "A little magic goes a long way," Lissa replied, sipping the drink. "You ought to try it." Drasha shook his head. "Not my thing. Head went all fuzzy the few times someone tried to show me." He saw Lissa's look move to the mausoleum door. "Your dad. How long does he have?" "A day, maybe 2. After that, it's bones. Like those skeletons you came in with? Lisa nodded. Those were good ones too. A lot of bodies you find are too damaged. Spine crushed by a club, legs hacked off or carried away by some animal. Everyone thinks raising corpses to be your undying servants is easy, but it's really not. Sure. I'm going to get my dad now, just so you know. Drasha narrowed one eye. Pretty sure Castus wouldn't like that. Pretty sure Castus isn't here right now. Lisa drained the water, stood. I'll be right back, promise. The necromancer went towards the mausoleum door, blocked by Agram, and tried to crouch, squeeze around the rock monster. Agram, still doing its grumbling purrs, shifted with her every approach, blocking the ways until Lissa, cursing, glared back at Drasha. "Tell this thing to move," Lissa snapped. "If you think Agram listens to me, you haven't been paying attention." "Fine, I'll do it the hard way." Lysa took a step back, brought her hands up, and started some muttering that sounded, to Drasha, distinctly arcane. The sort of phrasing that did bad things if you let it go on too long. So he reached back, grabbed his rope blade, and threw it. For once, the weapon did its job, wrapping around the necromancer's arms, the blade itself catching on her cloak. Drasha yanked Lissa back. A great throw, a great tie, but there was one problem. Lissa, falling back, released her spell into a very crowded sky. Chapter 7. A Spell Cast. "What did you do?" Drasha yelled as Lissa struggled on the muddy ground, still bound by Drasha's well-whipped rope blade. "What I meant to, and it would have worked just fine without your stupid... What is this thing anyway?" "It's a rope blade, obviously." Drasha's voice jumped another octave for a singular reason. A bat had landed on his head. A second bat. The first, seemingly dead, had plummeted like a stone onto Drasha's ragged crimson guard leathers, only to curl up and begin nibbling through his armor. Drasha had torn that one off only for another to land in his hand. A third made its ill-advised entry by splashing into the boiling water pot on the fire. "Whatever it is, get it off me," Lissa snarled. "Not my priority at the moment." Drasha reached up, got his hands on the burrowing bat, and pulled it from his hair. As he brought the squirming vermin down to his eyes, the Crimson Guard screamed, a shout that did little for anyone thinking him brave. Then again, such a reaction was warranted. The bat appeared to have lost most of its skin, the creature as dead alive as those damned corpses below. "Ack!" Drasha threw the undead bat against the mausoleum's wall, where it broke into a bunch of aimless bones. "What the hell, Lissa?" Lissa, still trapped, could only glare at Drasha, and glare she did. Drasha had only seen looks like that from his mother and several poor dates. It was difficult to have a good date in the slums, but Drasha had long recognized his own futility in that arena, and he recoiled, summoning up excuses before remembering just who was who in the situation. Another bat squelched into the mud at his feet. The little thing started squirming towards him. "It won't last long," Lissa said. "I'll dispel it right now if you get this off me." Okay, Drasha muttered, kicking away the newest bat and retrieving the rope blade's handle. "Just don't move or the blade will cut you. If that thing scratches me, I'm cursing you into a pit so deep you'll never see light again." "Been there," Drasha murmured. He leaned over Lissa, pulling the rope and its attendant blade over the necromancer's head slow. Bats continued to fall, to squirm, to nibble at Drasha's feet. Whenever one became courageous enough to make a play for his ankle, the Crimson Guard batted it away. "What do you mean, been there?" Lissa asked, indignation still front and center in her tone. "I'm saying, as much as this place sucks, where I've been was worse. Worse than a mausoleum filled with corpses and a sky raining undead bats? Definitely. Lissa winced as the last bits of rope blade left her shoulders behind. She sat up, waved her right hand, and the squibbing bats ceased moving, collapsing into the mud. The spell gone, Lissa saw Drasha's hand waiting for her, a dirty grip she nonetheless took to stand. "Remind me never to ask you about it then," Lysa said, brushing off the hand on her equally dirty cloak. "Have enough horror stories for a lifetime." "Fine with me," Drasha said, then scratched at his head. "Think that one might have bit me." "Serves you right." Drasha, having holstered the rope blade, gave Lissa a quizzical look. "Were you trying to kill Agram? Can you even do that?" Lissa bit her lower lip, then threw a sheepish smile. "Probably not. I was trying to bring all the bugs on those rocks back to life. I wanted them to bite Agram, make him squirm out of the way." "That was your grand plan? Really?" Now Lissa turned the incredulous stare on the Crimson Guard. "Drasha, we're in a forgotten swamp with nothing good within a day's walk through awful muck. You think we're like the best necromancers around?" I guess I'm not sure. Are you?" "No, moron, we are not. But we get by, get to practice some fun magic, and nobody cares when we turn some grave robbers into fresh playthings." Lysa folded her arms, was about to dish out some more frank details about life amid the swamp, when her stomach issued an audible priority correction. Drasha laughed. "Yeah, that's how I feel too," the guard said. "If you're done with the whole rebellion thing, want to eat some dinner?" "What about my dad?" Lisa threw another glare at Agram. "I'm not leaving him down there." "What do you want me to do about it?" "Move Agram? So you can get your dad back and double team us with death magic? Come on." Lissa stamped a boot in the mud, flinging wet dirt up on her own legs. She swore, stopped herself from breaking down into tears, gave Drasha a straight, honest, pleading stare. "He's all I have, Drasha. Please." The Crimson Guard knew he'd lost the moment he saw that look. Agram wouldn't wake up. Drasha tried saying the rock monster's name, patting its shoulder, even giving the stone a slap. Lissa, snacking on some of the salted meat, watched and shook her head. "At least I'm trying," Drasha replied when his latest attempt, a kick at Agram's supposed shins, only left the Crimson Guard's toes aching. "What are you doing?" "I did try, remember? You got in the way." "Okay, I mean, really. How about something that doesn't involve cursing our friend?" Lissa wanted to ask whether Drasha really considered this strange rock monster, one that, in the short time Lissa had spent among these weirdos, hadn't once given Drasha the slightest deference, his friend. She wanted to, but Drasha's ruined clothes, his exhausted look, and the fact that he was, at least a little, trying to help her, sent the necromancer's thoughts flying in a different direction. "How about this?" Lissa asked, standing, going up to Agram. "Boost me." "Boost you?" Lissa tapped her leg. "I need a lift." "To do what?" "Just do what I ask, Drasha, and stop talking." The Crimson Guard did as he was trained and obeyed the order, coming close, lowering his linked hands and lifting Lissa up until she was level with Agram's vacant face. The rock monster didn't have eyes that Lissa could see, but there were twin dark holes where eyes might be. "Ready?" Lissa asked. "I guess." "Here goes." Spreading 2 fingers, Lissa jammed them into Agram's eyes. Agram woke with a wild grumble, throwing Lysa away and sprawling her and Drasha into the mud. The Crimson Guard landed close enough to the cook fire to smell his hair start to burn, though that quickly became the least concern as Agram took one stomp towards the 2 of them, fists raised. "See?" Lissa said, slipping in the mud as she tried to stand. "I told you it'd work." Chapter 8. The Rock Monster. Pebbles, stones, the cast-offs of a landslide stumbled upon by someone or something with enough magic and boredom to make a difference. How many species, if you could even call something like Agrum a species, began that way? Siln didn't know, though she would make a bet her own people were responsible for a good number of the magical accidents wandering the land. Some focused effort, a little bit of experimentation, and bam! A walking, grunting rock monster held together by old enchantments. Did Agrum have needs? Wants? A conscience beyond the evident desire to smash random things? Siln considered these questions as she watched Drasha and the necromancer run like panicked morons from the creature they'd awoken. Their makeshift camp disappeared beneath splattered mud and stomping stones as the enraged rock monster, in a reasonable reaction to getting poked in its black eye pits, chased the pair around. Nevertheless, Agrum didn't seem to be quite as lethal as the rock monster had shown against the corpses and bandits. No whirling away into the ground only to appear elsewhere, no launching itself into a rolling rubble slide to catch Drasha when his foot stuck in the mud, or when Lissa tripped on her tattered cloak and planted her face in the reeds. A riddle that had Siln smiling when she realized the answer. Agrum wasn't trying to mash the pair. The rock monster was having fun. The icicle cage holding Siln gave a perfect prismatic view of the scene in the descending twilight, oranges and purples marking shadows as the trio yelped, fell, and dashed around the mausoleum. Great entertainment, and one ruined when Lissa found some distance, caught Agrum too focused on mock-mauling Drasha, and started up the words to some damned spell. In a melted flash, the icicle crumbled away. Siln's snapped finger sent a line of chill energy right at Lissa, and sniffed as the necromancer's spell-casting mouth snapped shut, lips frozen to one another. "Time to be done," Siln announced to Agrum and his victim, a mud-soaked Drasha so enveloped in the brown gunk as to be unrecognizable. A game isn't fun when someone gets their soul stripped. "What?" Drasha asked, between coughs. Agrum at least understood. The rock monster held up its mashing fists and settled into a sit upon the ruined ground. "Our necromancer here was planning quite the spell, if I could read her lips right," Siln said, walking right up to Lissa, who sent a fabulous glare Siln's way. The necromancer did have a way with expressions, ones Siln herself couldn't quite mimic. Frosted skin like hers didn't have that same elastic band. Pity. "One problem, though," Siln said, reaching up to cup the necromancer's chin. Yes, she was shorter than Lissa. Siln was shorter than just about everyone. A fact she'd long ago accepted. It was fine. Totally fine. "The spell you were casting, it wasn't aimed at Agrum, was it?" Siln said, then turned Lissa's face to aim right at Drasha. "Are you aware, guard, that a skilled necromancer doesn't need to start with a corpse? They can fashion ones out of the living?" Drasha put a hand on Agrum's boulder knee and pulled himself to a dripping stand. "Can't, anyone make a corpse like that?" "You're missing the point, Drasha. Lissa was trying to kill me." The Crimson Guard squinted at Lissa, then shrugged. "I mean, we're her captors. Not sure why you'd think I was more dangerous than Agrum, though." "It's not your threat," Siln laughed. As if. "No, it's who you are, what you are. She wanted someone she could control. Agrum, who knows what waits inside the rock monster?" "But you would just burst that flame rose or whatever?" "If I was awake," Siln said. "But there I was, asleep in my ice, right?" She turned back to the necromancer. "Tell me, Lissa, how right am I?" Lissa, lips still sealed tight, murmured a frustrated noise. "Indeed," Siln said. "I think we can put this little argument aside. Lissa, I trust you've learned that I'll always be watching, aware. Even if our friends are a little on the dull side, You can be sure I will obliterate you should another such spell come from your mouth. Clear?" Lisa nodded. Siln let the energies lapse, like untying a mental knot, and the ice melted away, leaving rivulets dribbling down Lysa's chin. The necromancer, smartly not letting any fresh water go to waste, licked them up. "Well, now what?" Drasha asked. "The bedrolls are ruined, the fire's out, it's almost dark." "A litany of facts, thank you," Siln replied, at last letting Lisa's chin go. "But you're missing one. The necromancer's father remains dead, and her desire to rectify that situation is unchanged." "So? So I propose a deal, as our ludicrous ally Castus has yet to return. Should the cackler fail to appear before dark, we let Lissa bring her father back." Siln let embers infuse her eyes, a child's trick among her people, but very effective at getting these humans to imagine themselves burning bright. Then we ask him what might have happened to our friend, and what to expect when we go after him. A few hours hadn't done any favours to the bodies. Siln once again provided light and led the way down the steps, with Lysa in the middle and Drasha behind. The Crimson Guard kept a hand on the rope blade's hilt, ready to jab it forward should Lissa decide now was the time to turn traitor. He almost stabbed the necromancer anyway. She'd tried to rip his soul away and take his body for a meat puppet. But the spinning, strange nature of Drasha's new life held him back. The last 2 days hadn't made much sense, even when put into the wild world they lived in, one torn by magic, ancient beings, and the continual quests for power that ravaged everything they touched. Drasha had aimed for the simplest thing: survival. And despite all this, that aim held true. He still walked, still breathed, and so long as that was possible, Drasha could find his focus. Agram, too, had found its momentary passion. The rock monster had stayed settled in the mud, refusing to join them in returning to the mausoleum. Siln had joked about poking the monster's eyes again, a move Drasha refused, didn't find funny. Sure, the Ice Lady said Agram was just playing around, but she'd not had those giant fists landing near her ears, her eyes, her skull. Siln reached the bottom and stepped aside, clearing the way for Lissa to approach her father's body. The other necromancer was still there too, bloodied and rigid. Drasha thought about swapping his own shredded, mud-coated cloak for the dead necromancer's comparatively clean one. Robbing the dead was an ancient pastime in the slums of his childhood, but Lissa's sudden speaking drew his attention away. The necromancer started with simple lines, rhyming, bouncing, and not at all like what Drasha would have expected for something designed to draw back departed spirits. A name dropped in here and there, Trallus, as the owner of the traits Lissa listed off in her chant. When the second verse ended, this one extolling Trallus's love for his daughter, Lissa knelt at her father's side, put a hand on the man's grey ankle. Her voice dropped octaves like Agram dropped those bandits, quick and hard, and Drasha thought he saw black and deep blue wisps dance between Lissa's gripping fingertips. The language swapped to one Drasha didn't know, and he brought the rope blade up, taking a step back to have room to throw. Siln, for her part, watched with a concentrated frown. Taking notes? Drasha shook off the horrific dream of Siln marching about the land with a horde of frosted zombies in tow. Instead, watched as Lissa wrapped up her chanting, straightened and blew her father a kiss. A small purple mote danced from her mouth to her father's body, vanishing inside the man's tattered folds. The necromancer folded her arms, smiled, and watched. With a grunt, a hiss, a groan, her father lurched upwards, his animated features contorting like someone waking up from a long nap. The man's bright green eyes found his daughter, and he laughed, a wheezy thing, and Drasha was sure a spider came crawling out in the airy exodus. "How many times, Lissa? How many times are you going to bring me back?" As many times as it takes, Father, Lisa said, then reached down to help her dad to his feet. Now, I hope you're feeling good, because we have some friends to kill. Chapter 9. A Cult, Hunting We Will Go. A nighttime hike through the swamp wasn't an idea loved by anyone, least of all Lisa, who'd spent a good long while trudging through the sludgy waters and knew them to be filled with all manner of unpleasant teeth and tongues. So when Siln advocated, they set off amid the chilling moonlight in search of the cackler, the same one who'd planted knives in Lysa's father and their now-dead ally. Lysa tried to argue against. Trallus, her father now restored to the half-life treasured by every corpse who found it, seconded her argument, rasping out a litany of threats and bad outcomes to all who'd attempt such a venture. The group stood again at the mausoleum's outside entrance, basking in the merry warmth of a campfire sparked to life by Siln with minimal effort. The frosted witch was the only one that didn't seem tired as Trallus concluded his dire warnings, and she dismissed them all with a single laugh. "You're cowards," Siln declared, sending a slow gaze around the circle. "Every one of you." "Or maybe we're tired," Drasher offered. Lisa threw the guard a nod. The man was hopelessly overmatched, his naive fears at play every time Lisa stole a look at him. The best thing would be to sleep away the night, declare the cackler a lost cause, and get Drasher back to civilization's safe blanket. And she, of course, could return to the cult with her father, continue perfecting her skills, and eventually fulfill the dread daydreams she longed for. An endless skeleton and zombie supply, meeting Lissa's every need, while she could bask in the summer sun, soaking up magical tomes looted from passing carts by her undying servants. She would crack the secrets of the world, putting herself atop a new pantheon of magical gods, a master over life, death, and everything in between. It would... "You okay, Lissa?" Drasher asked, and the necromancer realized all the eyes were on her. "You had a really weird look just now. Creepy, but happy." Lissa answered, casting around for an explanation and finding one. "I was just thinking about how much I'll enjoy destroying all those necromancers." "What?" Siln asked. "You're in that same cult." "Doesn't mean I like it." "Lysa?" asked her father. "I don't understand." "It's called strategy, Dad. Something you could think about." Lissa wheeled towards Siln. "Here's a thought, Frosty. You want to go walking in the slime all night? How about you keep us on top? A little ice road, if you will." "That will take effort. Effort I won't be able to expend slaughtering your friends." "What, think we're not up to it?" "No." "Agram can handle it," Drasher interjected. "Get us there, Siln, and I bet Agram can take anything those necromancers can throw at us." Agram, still sitting silent in the mud, said nothing. Lisa smirked. Siln sighed. The ice formed with texture, feeling more like cold, coarse sand than the slippery disasters Lissa sometimes saw when winter tried to claim the swamp. If her cloaked band had issues crossing a frozen marsh with their boots, skeletons, and zombies, whose coordination measured similar to a drunk's, failed miserably, resulting in more than one ambush returning home, sans sacrifices. Siln's version, a slick path just wide enough for Agram to rumble along, let the group walk in hushed comfort. The twin moons helped the atmosphere, their partnership casting silver into the nightly fog. Lissa felt as though she moved in a dream, the solid ice beneath her feet, the only real thing in a day of absurdities. That her father grumbled along behind her, muttering memories to himself in a losing attempt to retain them, only added to reality's frailty. How many more times could Trallus be returned to her side and still be himself? One of many lingering questions awaiting her rise to ultimate knowledge. Drasher, following Agram as the party's leader, wasn't so troubled. His own murky future could remain that way so long as Drasher lived to see it. Escaping those rancid slums only to be slain in an awful swamp, or worse, turned into a shambling corpse, seemed the sort of comedic fate he'd seen bandied about in shanty plays. Those productions, cobbled together from shreds of playbills that escaped the city, resembled Drasher's current party in ways he didn't want to think about, random, confused, and destined for a bad ending. If Scylla shared any of those misgivings, she neither spoke up about them or bothered to address their likely causes. She walked at the group's back, her eyes closed, her mouth muttering a repeated incantation in a language nobody save her and her far, far distant, and possibly dead, people knew. The result cast the ice forward and kept it together long enough for her feet to give the crystals their farewell footfalls. Behind her, the swamp regained control, a constant crackling in their wake. The march continued until Drasher bumped into a stopping, still Agram. The rock monster rumbled, shifted to its left to give Drasher a view, albeit one blurred by fog. Nevertheless, the Crimson Guardsman caught enough to know what he saw. Shanties, makeshift shacks strung together on narrow bars amid a tree-infested section of the swamp. Drasher made out those dwellings not through moonlight, but by a towering bonfire in the center of the village? What did necromancers call their homes? Coffins, Lissa intoned, low and serious when Drasher whispered the question to her. At the guard's incredulous expression, Lissa laughed. No, idiot, it's just, I don't know, home? They're taking vengeance, Trallas said, overriding his daughter's odd humor with straight solemnity. They believe we are dead and are punishing him for it. The him referenced was no secret, for Castus's voice had started rising over the swamp's gurgles as the group gathered together, standing on a thick ice patch, courtesy of Siln's magical know-how. The cackler, while succumbing to his incessant laughter, did sound stressed, with yelps and odd, unintelligible pleas breaking into the night. 8 necromancers, each one with a bunch of bodies doing their work, Drasher asked Lissa, who nodded. That's more than we can handle, Siln. More than you can handle, maybe, Siln replied. She reached out, gave Agram a soft pat on the rock monster's side. Agram and I will take the lead. What about us? Lissa asked. Drasher will keep you company. You'll stay here, where I won't have to worry about your inevitable betrayal. Lysa folded her arms, glared. Inevitable? Presume much? I make a habit of assuming the worst in people, particularly those who play with the dead. Before Lissa could sputter up something to match, Siln gave Agram a light push, and the rock monster charged ahead, splashing into the swamp with both noise and a filthy spray. Siln herself followed, breaking into a run across the water, her every step landing perfect on new ice. She broke away from Agram's path, letting the monster make a straight run into the town while Siln went left. 2 against near 50, Lissa asked. They're dead. Very dead. She glanced at her father. I call her corpse. You'll back me up. The body is yours, daughter. Drasher tried not to throw up. Chapter 10. Swampy Slaughter. What was desire to a stone? What was hunger to a creature made of dust and rock? Did Agram have deep thoughts? Was it contemplating the nature of anger as it barged straight through the first shambled cabin on a straight line towards Castus and his bonfire perch? The cackler didn't have a damn clue, but he laughed at the sight, a most pure howl. His voice rippled over the bonfire's snap and hiss. It disguised the slow burn searing his ankles and turned the bawdy band of dead dealers from their sacrifice to their doom. A delight on all counts. For necromancers, They'd been auspicious in their choice of settlement location, squatting along a sandbar series amid the squalid swamp's deeper sludges. Whether it had been a conscious choice to make any approach a wet and noisy affair or a prodigious accident didn't matter when the invader had no interest in secrecy. Instead, Agram plunged up and down along the muddy mounds, its boulder body bringing with it reeds, weeds, and several pieces of shattered furniture. A spare rope waved from Agram's forearm, a burnt brown colour swishing across as the rock monster laid into the first hapless skeleton. The bone servants rose at their master's call, several dozen at least, and lurched at Agram. Some kept the composure, had the fingers left to wield crude clubs and battered blades. The threat they might pose to a normal man would have been considerable. The threat they posed to Agram. Castus laughed again as the first skeleton blew apart at Agram's first swing. The bones scattered far, wide, and furious, plinking off its dead friends as they marched towards a similar fate. A second skeleton grabbed at Agram's left arm and found itself driven deep beneath the slime. Agram's sturdy foot mashed it a moment later. Never had a breaking bones crack sounded so good. "This your friend?" snarled a stretched voice near Castus's ear, the cowled form who'd led this whole dumb dance from the start. "Tell it to stop." "I don't think I will, sir, unless you put out this fire." The necromancer might have been glaring at Castus, but beneath the hood, the cackler couldn't tell. Castus also didn't care. Agram had bulldozed 4 skeletons now and seemed to have not the slightest injury. The cult's other cowled ones all stood together on the fire's far side in fevered discussion, perhaps trying to decide what spell might save their lives. "You'll take this thing and leave us?" the necromancer asked. "Of course." "Then go." The necromancer, pulling a winding knife. Why did all these dark sorcerers carry the strangest blades? And cutting, let Castus fall forward, earning another singe along the ragged bandit-pilfered boots the cackler wore. "Hurry!" Castus most definitely did not hurry. The cackler stood up, brushed some lingering ash off his clothes, soaked in the fire's pleasant, now that Castus wasn't inside it, warmth. The necromancer approached, waving that stupid knife and asking again for Castus to rein Agram in. Instead, Castus whirled, grabbed the necromancer's knife hand with his left, while putting a visceral, swift end to the squishy spellcaster with the cackler's clawed right. The imbecile made not a sound, his dying mark instead coming through the 4 skeletons who found their enchantment gone. Agram's fist connected with suddenly dissembling bones, the rock monster losing its balance and falling face first into the muddy ground. The remaining skeletons pounced, at least as much as fumbling, blunt objects could. Clubs and blades banged on Agram's rocky skin, while those skeletons without sought to bash or poke Agram with boned fingers and fists. An all-out motley assault, and one Castus would have prevented, save for the other necromancers. The cackler's quick, quiet murder had not, unfortunately, gone unnoticed. Castus counted 5 moving mouths. The other 2 had their focus on Agram, and raised hands gesturing his way. A dire outcome portended for the furry fiend, so Castus did what he could, and grabbed the old necromancer's body. The elder cultist moved easy, a body shield claimed and thrust up in time to absorb 1, 2, 3 waves of blistering dark energy. Spells hunting perhaps for a soul to steal or simply destroy. Instead, they took the poor body and broke it asunder, crawling it with purple lightning and rendering the already threadbare cloak into nothing more than bits, and leaving Castus holding the wavy knife. The cackler threw the blade at the befuddled necromancers, their minds apparently too addled by unchallenged success and the dubious nutritional options available to one in a fetid marsh. Castus's aim was, as ever, on point, and 5 became 4, though the distance between the cackler and his would-be killers was still too far. He needed help, the Frost Witch provided. The infernal workings of magic remained a secret to Siln. So far as she knew, the origins of the stuff, which came about in differing ways depending on your abilities, desires, and knack for snapping fingers, lay hidden behind an impassable veil, one she dearly loved to pierce, if only so she could figure out why some magic invigorated her like a fresh nap, while others sapped her to a slog. The ice walkway covering the swamp had turned into one of the latter, a constant draw on her attention to keep the spell focused. The ice had wanted to grow throughout the sludge, had to fight off warmer currents and pressing plants. Footfalls, particularly Agram's monstrous stomps, forced Siln to thicken the ice. She'd had to recast the spell in several ways, from her words to get it started, her hands to guide its width, and her focused eyes to stretch the length. Magical minutiae might not matter to most, but to Siln, at last free from her icy burden, the leftover drag slowed her next spell just long enough. The Frost Witch rounded her chosen shack on approach, saw Castus racked with purple necromantic fire, and assumed him dead. Vengeance, boosted by the delightful realization Siln would be splitting any treasure with one fewer party, had her page through her mental spell library and settle on a perfect remedy to the necromancer quintet. No. Castus somehow survived, ditched a formless, charred lump off his arms, and with a small flick sent a knife spinning into one of the cowled killers. The man slumped, leaving Siln with 4 confused cowls on a muddy knoll. There were 1,000 spells perfect for this situation, Siln losing herself in a loose headache among those mystical wilds. Castus called her back, a yelp reminding her the necromancers weren't similarly confused. 2 had turned towards her, their hands raised and ready for another death flame. Not very creative, these sorcerers. Siln, though, couldn't judge, as she went with her old standby. A concussive blast tossed from her fingertips like a dart. It struck the moving mouth of the closest necromancer, the man's chat breaking off in a loose gargle before disappearing amid an orange bloom. The fire was pretty, but the spell's key effect beat the heat, blasting all 4 necromancers into the mud and sending a wave out in all directions. Agram took the swamp water in the stone face, a fact that failed to distract the rock monster from mashing the skeletons. The bones grabbed, beat, and dragged Agram further into the depths, but their efforts faltered as the skeletons lost their femurs, their faces, their feet to the rock monster's ever-swinging fists. A foregone conclusion there, so Siln returned her attention to the smoulder, downed necromancers. "Hey!" Siln snapped, noticing Castus already among the robed ones, delivering final cuts with his retrieved knife. They might know something important. That Lissa and her father do not, Castus cackled. I'm afraid I have no trust left for these dead lovers, my frosted friend. Better a foe finished than left to linger, eh? Siln fought off the sigh, as tempting as it was, and tromped back towards the trio, left alone on their ice patch. With a wave, the Frost Witch released the spell, dumping the cursing threesome into the swamp. When Drasha, sputtering, climbed onto a muddy bar and glared her way, Siln just pointed at the houses. "The necromancers are dead. Time to take their stuff." Siln spoke slow, loud enough for Lissa and her father to hear the words, a second spell on the icy woman's fingertips. Now was the traitor's test, and this sopping wet, Siln could freeze their bodies to annihilation in a heartbeat. Lysa, and Trallus with her, did nothing more than brush themselves off, nod, and accept their grim freedom. Too bad. The spell would have been a good one, and the world could always use fewer necromancers. This is the end of Hope's Hollow, Part 2. Keep a lookout for Part 3 soon, and for more adventures check out blackeybooks.com. Thanks for listening.